Most people view politics and society through the lens of symbols, and in this video, we're going to actually examine what that means and why it's significant to understand that a lot of people think about the world in terms of symbols, and how that can have both upsides, downsides, and what it actually means for our ability to discuss things intelligently. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watts. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our message out there and get us successful. We are almost at 20,000 subscribers, my friends. I am so excited. Thank you guys so much for watching, and now on to the video. So, when a lot of people think about particular issues they're passionate about when it relates to politics or particular things in the culture, we oftentimes associate a symbol with it. In order to understand what I'm talking about, we have to first understand what a symbol is in this context. So a symbol, I define a symbol as an idea or a thing or a concept that has an imprecise meaning but inspires a certain kind of understanding in the hearts of most people that can then, if leveraged in the proper way, move them to support things that they may not have otherwise supported, or they may support in general, simply by virtue of associating it with that concept or idea. So, for example, the American flag is a symbol. The Statue of Liberty is a symbol. And sometimes marketers are able to associate certain policies or certain projects with those things, and it moves patriotic Americans, or people that like that thing in general, towards supporting particular ideas. Think, for example, how the Statue of Liberty's motto, "Give me your poor, your huddled masses," has been invoked to defend a kind of ethos surrounding immigration that gives itself towards open borders and more liberal immigration policies. That's effectively an example of using the symbolism of the Statue of Liberty, which is then associated with the entire belief system and the entire ethos of America, to argue for a political policy that is far bigger than merely sentiment or merely aspiration or emotion, because ultimately the Statue of Liberty is an aspirational thing. It's not a concrete thing in the sense that America is constantly working to live up to its ideas. But the symbolism around it that is sometimes used to promote a more open borders policy basically says, no, this is a concrete thing, and we have to define our policies by that. When considerations of policy are multifaceted, they are variable, and they have to take into account many things, including the nation's concrete obligation to its citizenry, including the conditions of the community at that time, including what exactly it means to be a citizen within the context of that nation, including ensuring assimilation happens, both ideological assimilation, because Americanism is first a worldview, at second a designation on the Census Bureau, and also social assimilation. They have to adopt our norms. These things go way beyond that motto, and yet that simple symbol collapses and get rid of all those things that are important for a coherent immigration policy and gives us platitudes, and so many people are deceived by it, unfortunately. Well, beyond visual things being symbols, ideas themselves that are not visually depicted can also be symbols. So, for example, and this is talked about in an article written for the Political Science Quarterly for Princeton in the 1950s, national interest or national security, which is a term that many of us hear today, is also actually a symbol. It kind of fits the definition because it is a particular concept that has an imprecise meaning. Its meaning changes, but it inspires a certain sense of understanding within people. Most people will say, well, I want to have national security addressed, or I want a candidate in terms of politics that supports national security. So the danger of seeing the world through symbols is actually twofold. The student of propaganda will understand what I'm about to say. The first part of this is that things that have an imprecise meaning and can mean different things to different people can be leveraged by bad actors who seek to take ideas that may be good or they may be bad or whatever, and fill them in with content that may have absolutely nothing to do with the idea at hand, and then therefore leads people down a erroneous pathway. So, for example, think of the ideas that were used to push America into Iraq and into Afghanistan. National security was actually invoked for both of those conflicts. And now 20 plus years later, we see that it was a massive boondoggle, a massive waste of money. It wasted more American lives than needed to be. And ultimately, it was in many cases a money grab. But the symbol of national security against the backdrop of a terrorist attack motivated mass support within Americans to go with whatever the government said. So that's one danger of symbols. And if you want to get more into understanding how propaganda works through symbols, think of how the modern day American breakfast was formed. The modern day American breakfast was actually a project from Edward Bernays. It was actually entirely an artificial construct where he managed to symbolize breakfast in the context of a few particular foods, bacon, eggs, so on and so forth, so much so that it became a seed in the American consciousness, and it sprouted into a habit, into an activity that people began to do, and therefore the American breakfast became associated with bacon and eggs. And of course, along with that came rise in cholesterol levels, rise in diabetes, rise in heart disease, of course. But I'm not knocking if you guys like that stuff, but still, it's important to understand how symbols impact reality. So that's the first part of symbols. They can be used and manipulated by those within power if their meaning is not precise and well-defined. But the second part about symbols that is really talked about is that they can also cause a people to have a sense of mass amnesia and not actually understand the world around them or understand particular things like politics, and therefore it robs them of self-direction. So let me explain this. If you associate certain ideas with symbols that you like, you will oftentimes not be able to actually confront the ideas for themselves. You will always confront them within the context of symbols. So for example, I'll go back to the military example. Many people will say that we support our troops. It is the American thing, the patriotic thing to do to support our troops. But they will then evaluate American engagement around the world within the context of supporting our troops. So much so that the moment you criticize an American engagement around the world, or the moment you criticize a policy undertaken by the military, you could easily be seen as unpatriotic, because your sense of patriotism comes not from a clear understanding of patriotism, comes not from a philosophically constructed idea of patriotism. It comes from a feeling you have about patriotism that is sustained by imagery, by ideas, by symbols. So it is very easy to lose yourself, to lose your mind amidst these aspirational ideas that have no content within them. It's one thing for a propagandist to foist falsehood upon you. You can actually resist that. You can actually push back against that. You can actually even expose that if you have the right machinery. I talk a lot on the channel about manufacturing consent, things of that sort. But it's another thing if your own understanding of knowledge, which will inform your actions, which will inform how you evaluate things, is littered with ideas that don't actually have you think at all, but instead compel you towards an emotionalism in your everyday life. Again, symbols dominate our landscape. And beyond national interest, beyond breakfast, beyond all that, you can see symbols in so many other cases. You can see symbols in terms of, for example, entertainment. Hollywood, the Hollywood sign was actually the symbol that encompassed so much entertainment. And Hollywood in general as a town, even though filming takes place all over the country now and all over the world now, but Hollywood still is the symbol that is used to refer to celebrity culture and entertainment, even though that is old. Let's think of how this works in political terminology. Think about how we talk about economic issues in this country. For example, the middle class is another symbol, or the working man, or the little guy. You may hear a politician say, well, you got to stand up for the little guy. That's also a symbol. It's a symbol because, again, these are ideas that convey something to people, that convey a certain type of image, but their meaning is actually imprecise. Let's actually dig into this. So, the little guy. What exactly is the little guy? Well, the little guy would be someone of a certain income bracket, I guess, that is juxtaposed, that is placed against some big evil corporation or some supposed evil billionaire or millionaire, in the words of Bernie Sanders, billionaires and millionaires or whatever, or some big institution that is much better than them. So if you stand up for the little guy, that must then therefore mean you're going to legislate or do something that will benefit one class of people that must, by necessity, disadvantage another class of people. While this may seem righteous because we oftentimes associate justice and injustice with scale, obviously most people will sympathize with a family in a suburban neighborhood more than they would a big bank on Wall Street. While this may seem sensible, this actually can lead to some very dangerous places. It can lead to a totalizing idea of what it actually means to be in a certain class, or what it actually means to be the little guy. Is someone somehow vulnerable and somehow less powerful just because their income is a certain way? Is income the measure of man's value? Is income the measure of man's strength? Well, if you make policy on the basis of the little guy, then income would have to be the measure, or in some way, shape, or form of man's value. It would have to be the measure of man's strength. But also, this idea of the middle class or the little guy presupposes a morally incorrect idea, which is that class is a moral category. It's not. Class is simply a financial category or a hierarchical category that is a very specific thing. But to suggest that class has some morality to it leads to the idea that poverty is a moral evil, when in all reality, a good indicator of class is oftentimes natural inequality, meaning we are differently able to do different things and our skills lead us to different places in life, which are therefore going to be able to move us towards certain classes. Some people make decisions which place them in a particular class. Other people don't make decisions, but have a certain limit in what they're able to do in terms of their processing power in their brain, and they land in a certain class. Other people are born into certain classes. Some people work their way up to the certain classes. It all depends. But to use these terms as political phrases is to essentially add a value to them, a moral value, because ultimately politics is just applied ethics. Politics is just applying ethics to a certain situation. Now, it all depends on whose ethics, which is the big problem that we have to talk about. People always try to separate ethics and morality from politics, but you can't. Because politics is simply taking a process which should be only legitimized on the basis of moral grounds, in the case of the United States, because it's the governed, and it's then using that process to work on things in the general society. So it has to have some kind of ethical core to it. And so when you mix class and politics, you get this idea, this sort of false categorization of class in a way that makes it ultimately quite dangerous for civil society and also creates envy and moral confusion. This is just one example of how symbols can be used if they are not defined, or if they are defined in the wrong way for chaotic purposes. Now, symbols can actually be good. One of the things, if we're going to be a United States of America, any country that's going to have a certain unity or cohesion to it must be able to organize around a common history, a common language, a common set of ideals, and or what have you. And sometimes the symbols, like the flag, or like some of the landmarks of our time, statues of great historical figures within our country, sometimes those are actually needed, or they are an auxiliary, they help people organize around their sense of national pride. So they can be good, but they can only be good, as I mentioned, if they are understood within their own proper context. Because symbols build consensus by virtue of being unifying, and consensus can be hijacked for evil purposes. Need I remind you what happened during the pandemic a few years ago, although we'll leave that alone just for now. The best way to deal with symbols in your everyday thinking about politics, the best way to deal with symbols as they interact with your political understanding, is to simply treat them not as the whole of your understanding or the primary feature of your ability to understand things, but as a helpful addition to the broader categories of knowledge that you're going to confront by virtue of being interested in politics or by virtue of being interested in a particular issue. So let me give you a practical example about this. When you're thinking about the issue of the American flag, do not automatically assume that if the American flag is raised somewhere or it is invoked by a speaker, that it is being invoked or raised for a virtuous purpose. actually investigate why the American flag is being used and why the American flag is being invoked in that particular context, and then weigh the results of your investigation against the principles that undergird the republic, the principles of natural law, and then see if the two line up. If the two don't line up, then you have a problem on your hands. If the two line up, then make a note of that mentally, that, okay, this is an acceptable use of that symbol. I'm going to keep using it. National security. Again, if someone says that we have to do X, Y, or Z for national security purposes, you must make the conscious effort to think about what that means and weigh it against sound principles, weigh it against the right to privacy, weigh it against the considerations of civil society, weigh it against the interest of those in the national security establishment that may actually not have America in mind, but have other things in mind, their own personal agendas, and understand what's actually going on. I can go on and on with examples, but it's more important to understand this. Symbols are an important addition to our knowledge, but they cannot be the whole of our knowledge. And my fear is that if people don't wise up to this, they will continue to fall for things that are easily avoidable and under circumstances, and their understanding of the world around them will continue to be impaired, which can only lead to, in the most restricted sense, in the political realm, a kind of tyranny born from a complacency and idiocracy, and in the social realm, a deterioration of social conditions, of social norms and values and bonds, because the values needed to sustain them are not being properly understood. But we can avoid this so long as we recognize this problem and confront it with haste, with, in my opinion, with reason, and also with a sense of aspiration to get to a higher level of understanding this issue necessitates. My friends, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there. If this inspired you, if this made you feel hopeful, or it made you edified, then I would encourage you to drop a donation if you want to. You can go to PayPal. I would prefer if you join my locals, christianwatson.locals.com. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.